Good afternoon. Kia ora e te whānau, ko Ajema Kija toko e noa, no Aotearoa, New Zealand, aho. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ajema Kija, Team Leader Infrastructure Resilience with National Emergency Management Agency, New Zealand. It is my pleasure and privilege to welcome you to the working session this afternoon, focused on nature-based solutions, building resilience through blue and green. Please allow me to extend a warm welcome to our speakers and all the participants here in Brisbane and across Asia Pacific online. First, I would like to acknowledge traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Turrbal, Jagera, and Yagara peoples, and pay respects to their elders, past and present. We extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. In today's discussion, we are taking the conversation from nature-based solutions forward, but not simply making a case why they play an important role in supporting disaster risk reduction and resilience building, but delving head-on into unpacking and understanding how this can be implemented. Our speakers will share real examples of how we move from fragmented demonstration projects to larger scale implementation of nature-based solutions, sharing their live examples from across Asia Pacific. These examples span nationwide implementation and local human-scale interventions, and illustrate how nature-based solutions present a real opportunity to blend hard and soft infrastructure together to enhance resilience for our communities. The format of the session is we will have 6 minutes presentations from our speakers, and followed by 25 minutes Q&A. So there's a real opportunity for you all to ask questions and delve deeper into our solutions and the examples that we present. You also have an opportunity to put your examples or questions through the app, or there are mics in front of you here, which you can ask questions through in person during the second half of the session. I'm joined here today by a distinguished panel of speakers. In the room, we have Mr. Jamie Isbister, Ambassador for Environment, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Australia. Ms. Narita Tanmani, Director of Climate Change Management and Coordination Division, Office of Natural Resources, Environment Policy and Planning, Thailand. And Mr. Alfred Ralifo, Senior Policy and Government Affairs Manager, WWF Fiji. And joining us remotely from China, we have Dr. Yongpan Liu, expert of Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development in China. And last but not the least, Mr. Tony Wong, Chief Executive of the Cooperative Research Center for Water-Sensitive Cities, Australia, who's beaming in from Rome. It's, I think, about 5 a.m. in the morning. So thank you, Dr. Wong. To kick off, I would like to invite Mr. Jamie Isbister to offer some context setting and framing remarks to introduce the session. Thank you, Mr. Isbister.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for making the opportunity to be able to bring this session together. I want to begin by also acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on, the Turrbal and Yagara people, and particularly acknowledge the contribution Indigenous people have played over thousands of years in managing our lands, river systems and oceans, and increasingly the realisation of just how critical that knowledge and practices is in terms of how we think about managing nature-based solutions, the footprint, the impact that we can have both negatively and positively on our lands. We talk about terms like nature-based solutions and they're seen as the latest or the newest approach, but I think, frankly, as we increasingly look back and realise, as mentioned, First Nations people have been implementing practices around management of land and oceans and systems that have been critical to the beauty and the biodiversity that we benefit from today, but which we're also now increasingly being challenged with as a result of climate change. I think it's fantastic to actually have a session at a conference on disaster risk reduction and on nature-based solutions, because I think for too long the issue of nature-based solutions has been talked about from simply an environmental biodiversity perspective, which is critical and which is important, but without understanding actually the role that our nature plays in mitigating and reducing the impacts of disasters is so central to tackling climate change, and actually are a key element of helping us adapt and deal with the impacts that we're facing from climate change. And so I think this session it's great to have it in this conference. I'm not going to say it's the first time it's been, but I would say, having been to a number of these, it's one of the few times that I've seen the focus around nature-based solutions in the disaster risk reduction element. The other one, acknowledgement is when I was at COP26 in Glasgow, was just to realise just how strong the issue of nature-based solutions, blue carbon, oceans, and forests are now so central in the whole climate discussion. I'm sure many people would say that's all too late, and an element of that is true. But it does, I think, really highlight the fact that how we think about this issue is now absolutely central to how we're dealing with the challenge of climate change, how we understand the carbon cycle, the role that nature-based solutions play in terms of both sequestering, but also, unfortunately, at times releasing carbon when they're destroyed, the role they have in terms of protecting and promoting biodiversity, and the critical nature they have as well in adaptation, in terms of being a role they can play in supporting communities and having natural ways of dealing with the challenges we can face from sea level rises, from water scarcity and food security issues. It's fantastic to have the panel we've got, I think, to really talk about, not just from a government perspective, but from an environmental, civil society, academic perspective, the learnings that are coming, and experiences and case studies that we've got. Blue carbon, obviously a form of nature-based solutions, more than 2/3 of it is in the Asia-Pacific region. It is increasingly being realised just how critical it is in terms of supporting the livelihoods and the biodiversity in our region. And I think one of the challenges is we realise that if you're going to be serious about nature-based solutions, they're not quick fixes. It's not about simply quick rehabilitation or they've got to be sustainable, they've got to be long-term, and to be frank, in many instances, they've got to be forever. And so how do we develop the financing models, the support, the revenue, the opportunities for communities who are so critical to managing and protecting nature-based solutions to be directly coming back to them feeling that they have ownership of it and they're benefiting from that it's not being simply exploited or utilised for other sources. And that is a difficult challenge, but an important one for us to deal with. And it comes, I think, to one of the final points that I would highlight is the importance of partnerships. I think in nature-based solutions, when we talk about it, we can often look at it through one guise, what a certain NGO might be doing, what government regulation investments might be doing, what the private sector might be trying to do in terms of looking at offset initiatives around nature-based solutions. But what I think we can be fairly confident of is the most successful initiatives are ones that bring partnerships together, and through that accountability of government at different levels, community organisations, First Nations people, and private sector. And I think without those partnerships, we end up simplifying nature-based solutions and narrowing it down to either a commodity or offset or a biodiversity gain or loss. And I think it's got to be more holistic, and it's got to bring those partnerships together. So I really look forward to hearing some of the case studies and examples that I know our panellists will be presenting on. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Spister. I would like to first invite Ms. Narendra Panmani to really speak about implementation of nature-based solutions in a national scale. Ms. Panmani.
You can sit here. Can you give?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm Narirat Panmani from Thailand, from the Office of Natural Resources and Environmental Policy and Planning, also known as the UNFCCC focal point with dealing with the climate change. And also, we also concerned about disaster risk reduction, because it's like the link between climate change and the disasters. So like many other countries that Thailand is also facing with the climate-related disasters. We have storm, we have flood, and even in the 2011 that we have a very big flood within the central part of Thailand. And we have economic loss, quite a huge amount of economic loss. That's why many institutes that put us within one of the top 10 nations that are vulnerable for climate change impact. Not just only flood, but we also have like coastal erosions from the storm. And even sometimes in the same area, we also facing drought and flood at a different time of the years. So these are the impact that happened related with climate change. So not more than with the monitoring data that we have, we also detect the changing in the precipitation patterns, and also with the rising of the temperatures, not just only for the land, but also the temperature within the oceans. So with our concern related to disaster risk reductions, we also think about the policy framework and implementation pathway regarding in response with the climate change impact. We have this master plan on climate change, we have the mitigation measures, and the most important thing is the national adaptation plans, which this is where we included the nature-based solutions within this plan, because we know that just only hard structure is not only one answer, but also nature has more powerful than the hard structure, and that's why we included within this plan, and also it was also included within our national strategies, 20-year strategies that we're going to concern more about the nature-based solutions. And this is going to be fit in with the sectoral plans of each agency that they concern more about these approaches. So as many of you heard about the eco-based system approaches that when we use with the biodiversity, but when it comes to the adaptations, we think that it's going to be more wider than that. So these are some of the areas that we give the importance to, especially for water resource management and also natural resource management. And another important sector that we think is human settlement. When you have flood, when you have drought, when they cannot grow their agriculture anymore, that means they have to relocate it. And we also like to show you about some examples that Thailand is also pleased to be involved with this project, developing the benefit of nature-based solution for integrated urban flood management project. And I have to thank all these organizations that support us within this slide. For this project, as I have said that we already have the flood in the big city, like in Bangkok city, which is just in the central part of Bangkok. And Bangkok is located also near the Chao Phraya River. So sea level rise is also have the impact with the Chao Phraya River. So when the sea level rise and when you have so many rains, that's gonna come together and the floods occur within Bangkok. So we also have this park at the central part of Bangkok, the Sukhumvit, and we call it Benjakiti Park, which has around like 8.9 hectares, the area. And with this project, we have the feasibility studies of how can we improve just only the green grass areas into the areas that can, like a giant sponge for Bangkok, and absorb all this water. So whether it's going to be water from the building part, and we can have like more retention time within the lake, and we can also collecting the storm water for using with the plantations. And this is going to be like the lake that we have studies. Next is the Cool Green Central Business District for Rayong. This is the one that we're gonna use the bio-infiltration system within the median of the road. And for the benefit cost ratios that we have known that it's like a more benefit today and for the futures, more than 14 and 9 within the best part, like for 20 years. And this is the examples of what we have learned from this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Panmani. That was an excellent example of policy development and putting policy to practice. Next, I would invite Dr. Liu to really talk about nature-based solution and implementation at a city scale level. Dr. Liu.
Here to share the experience of nature-based solution, the sponge city. My topic today is practice of sponge city construction in China. I'll talk about 3 parts. First of all, I'd like to introduce some background. In the past 14 years, China has seen rapid economic growth as well as large-scale urbanization. This rapid progress has led to serious water issues such as urban flooding, water pollution, and water shortage. To solve these issues, China started to look for more sustainable strategies. In 2014, the first technical manual on sponge city was issued by the ministry. Later, the central government officially launched the sponge city program and set up special funds. 30 cities were selected as pilot sites, such as Beijing and Shanghai. Each city receives 400 to 600 million yuan per year for 3 years. Recently, China began to promote sponge city on a national scale. Secondly, I'd like to talk about some of the principles and strategies for sponge city construction. A sponge city with a city constructed under traditional pattern. Let's call it a concrete city instead of the traditional fast drainage principle. Sponge city stormwater system adopts 6 major principles, that is, infiltration, detention, retention, purification, utilization, and discharge. Facilities were built to allow the stormwater infiltrate into the soil, slow down the flow, purify the stormwater, and reuse it. I would say the final purpose of sponge city is to build a more sustainable urban water system. Ecological space planning is a major part of sponge city. Natural habitat conservation is the most important in sponge city. For example, the ecosystem of the mangrove park in Sanya used to be disrupted. Sponge city construction took restoration as the main goal, so we can see how it looks like by now. This picture shows the scenario in Zhuhai Jinshan Park after typhoon weather. The park soon became a detention pond after the storm, then back to the usual in 5 hours. For the case part, I'd like to introduce the largest sponge city pilot site, Lingang Special Area in Shanghai. So far, Lingang has finished nearly 200 projects. In order to improve the environment of the old areas, we use many source control measures like rain gardens, rice garden beds, and something else. Ponding issues has been solved. Lingang has built more than 5 square kilometers parks and greenings in a sponge way. In this project, runoff were reduced, stormed, and purified. At the same time, we got the beautiful landscape. Here is the largest water body in Lingang District Lake. We made great efforts to improve the water quality, include pond and long pond source pollution, ecological restoration, and many water treatment measures. We have built an integrated management information platform. Here, we can check the rainfall information, water quality, and then the sponge city in Lingang has improved the environmental of the public space. Local people now can enjoy a better outdoor life. We did a lot to efforts to make more people to know Sponge City. A Sponge City museum was built. The technical knowledge of Sponge City were displayed using interesting pictures, physical models, and games. So far, the museum has attracted thousands of visitors from over the country. Well, I'll finish my pitch with this last review of Guchun Park, Shanghai. Thank you for your time and welcome to China. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lu. That was certainly a great example of a sponge city developed from scratch using nature-based solutions and what outcome it is, as you can see. Our next presenter is Mr. Alfred Relifo, and Mr. Relifo is going to talk about and demonstrate benefits of nature-based solution implemented at local and human scale.
Okay, Bula Vinaka, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and also to talk about a Fijian story of resilience from a community that is located on Fiji's Great Sea Reef. And this is a community, the district of Nadula in the islands of the Yasawa group. So WF is currently based in 3 of the Pacific Island countries, that is Fiji, Solomon Islands, and Papua New Guinea. And I'm going to focus more on one of the communities, the district of Nadula, and that is Nadula on the red dot on the map. Nadula is made up of about 7 villages. It's a very, very small community, and they're located on the leeward side of the Fiji group of islands. And they are quite prone to and vulnerable to the impacts of climate change because of they are much more prone to droughts. And at the same time, saltwater inundation, sea level rise, coastal erosion, storm surges, and they experience a lot of cyclones almost on an annual basis. One of the things that the Nadula and the people of Yasawa usually joke about in Fiji is that they have the ability to manufacture cyclones. And that is because they lie on the path, directly on the path of cyclones as cyclones enter the Fiji waters. So they have that power to manufacture and create cyclones. In 2018, the District of Nadula launched their first ever comprehensive integrated sustainable development plan. It took WWF working with the District of Nadula for about 3 years to actually consult and talk to them to put together this sustainable development plan. And this was directly linked to the Sustainable Development Goals agenda that was adopted in New York in 2015. There's a lot of conversations and collaborations with all members of the community, including women, youths, and those living with disabilities and the vulnerable, to put together this Sustainable Development Plan. So if you look at the screen, you have all those thematic areas of the Sustainable Development Plan, and they are kind of all connected to all the other thematic areas. And I'm going to be focusing more on those thematic areas that are in the colored part of the diagram. So this is where one of the thematic areas of the Sustainable Development Plan is for the community to develop their district disaster risk reduction plan. So each of the 7 villages have their own DRR plans, because each village is totally unique and different from the next village. So you cannot have one plan to cover all the 7 districts. You have one specific plan for each of the, all the 7 villages. Instead, we have one specific plan for each of the villages. And each village have their own committee, which is responsible for facilitating and implementing their disaster plan. So if you look at the disaster plan, it's kind of, the disaster management plan is actually very connected to their fisheries management plan, to their ecosystem restoration plan, their natural resource management plan. Traditional knowledge is also very, very important in this case over here. Food and water security component of their disaster plan is actually connected to mangroves, their fisheries, and all of that. Their disaster management plan is also divided into 3 main areas. You have disaster preparedness, disaster response, and also disaster rehabilitation and recovery. So I think the most important part for the community, they find that it's actually quite important that during the periods when you do not have a natural disaster occurring, that the community looks at rehabilitating the important ecosystems such as mangrove areas, reforestation of their limited land areas, which is quite important in terms of water security, but also the multiple benefits that come with it. So this is actually quite important, and that is how they integrate their traditional knowledge and nature-based solution into their disaster management plan, which is a component of their entire sustainable development plan. And I think some of the very, very important key messages that came out and the lessons from the community, and we worked with not just with the district of Nadula, but all the other districts that are along Fiji's Great Sea Reef. And one very, very key component is that nature is key, and it underpins the ability and the opportunities and the options for communities to be more resilient, not in terms of responding to climate change impacts, but also to other types of impacts like pollution, over-harvesting, and over-extractions of natural resources. And this is their safety net. So it is important that as we talk about the implementation of the Sendai framework, and we bring our community voices into this space, that we take into consideration the synergies that needs to happen and the integration with the national adaptation plans, with the nationally determined contributions under the implementation of the Paris Agreement and the implementation in COP27 in Egypt, but also let's not forget the COP15 in Montreal for the Convention on Biological Diversity, the ongoing negotiations for the BBNJ. These are all strongly interconnected, and we must ensure that we do justice in terms of all of these important plans. And the decade from 2020 to 2030 is very, very important to ensure that we encompass true resilience. A lot of the other recommendations on the slide is actually being made in a lot of the sessions that I've attended, but I think the one most important one is that we must ensure a rights-based approach for our indigenous people and local communities at the grassroots level. Only then, if we recognize their rights, we will be obliged to bring them into conversations and at the same time ensure that they are part of the solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Relly, for that. Was really great example of communities developing a plan, but that also linking it back to the policy and the national adaptation plans. A great example, which is grassroots development using nature-based solution and traditional knowledge. Our last presenter today is Dr. Tony Wong, and he'll present his intervention and wrapping up and summarizing key messages, but delving into the ecosystem services. So Dr. Wong, over to you.
Oh, good afternoon, and thank you for your invitation to present to you today. Greetings from Rome. You've heard so far a range of nature-based solutions. I'm getting some echo feedback, so I'm trying to. What I'd like to do is to perhaps talk a little bit about the range of nature-based solutions that you've heard thus far. And you've heard from speakers about large-scale nature-based solutions, and then we've heard from Dr. Liu about finer-scale nature-based solutions. And in fact, nature-based solutions cover a full spectrum. What I'd like to do is to elaborate on the spectrum of nature-based solutions that we can deploy. I use this diagram contained in a UNESCO report to elaborate this. The types of practice we can adopt depends on the scale and characteristics of ecosystems we seek to preserve, restore, or re-establish. This practice includes ecological conservation, restoration, rehabilitation, and biomimicry, depending on that scale. I start by reflecting on fostering ecosystem services from natural processes in forests and wetlands. Our efforts are often in the form of conservation ecology and restoration of natural capital to preserve or establish such ecosystem services as air purification, water filtration, especially in our water supply catchments, floods and erosion control, sustaining biodiversity and genetic resources. This is in addition to providing opportunities for recreation, education, and cultural enrichment. As we move towards the interface with areas of significant land use changes, such as agricultural and urbanization, the practice we apply to enable nature-based solutions is one of ecological restoration and rehabilitation. I use the word rehabilitation in the context that we are working to establish a new ecological equilibrium to enable it to coexist with the changed land use in these peri-urban environments. Examples of this are the re-establishment of mangrove swamps or the rehabilitation of eroded natural systems in riverbank protections and riparian zone natural habitat stabilization. The ecosystem services provided by mangrove swamps, for example, include regulating floods, storm surges and erosion control, prevention of saltwater intrusion, and of course, habitat to support greater biodiversity. As we move into a highly urbanized environment, as we have seen from Dr. Liu's presentation, our practices in fostering nature-based solutions is one of rehabilitation of degraded waterways in our cities and towns, and the biomimicry of natural processes that support the ecosystem services through their inclusion in landscape architecture and building architecture. So you can see that range of ecosystem that we are working with and the different kinds of practices that we need to adopt in harnessing these ecosystem services. As Mr. Isbether said at the beginning of this session, we have been working with nature for a long time. The concept of nature-based solution really has a lot to do with how we harness the ecosystem services to look at how we can reduce our disaster risk. In a peri-urban environment, I would like to talk about the role of transport. Transport network connecting cities provide opportunities for nature-based solutions to be distributed and connected through a peri-urban to this peri-urban environment. The ecosystem services provided by such systems include pollution control or drainage and safe passage of flood water, microclimate enhancement, and connectivity for flora and fauna biodiversity. The importance of transport networks in being part of nature-based solution really has to do with its connectivity and its ability to provide safe passage for floodwater. Some examples of these nature-based solutions incorporated in road corridors can be seen in these pictures here, associated with main freeways and ring roads in and around the city of Kunshan in Jiangsu province in China. These systems, as you can see, can be landscaped in a way that creates and re-establish natural processes as part of these road corridors that define the connections of cities. I would like to also talk about nature-based solutions in a peri-urban environment as they relate to providing ecosystem services in strengthening resilience for urban poor. Nature-based solutions can also provide some essential water and sanitation services to the urban poor living in informal settlements along the fringes of many cities. These communities are often subject to poor or non-existent sanitation services and are frequently flooded, often with highly contaminated water owing to the practices of open defecation or inadequacies of their current sanitation services. These communities are vulnerable to multiple stresses, all of which impact directly on their health and well-being. In order to address these compound challenges, as we can see from the slide here, we have developed at Monash University a water-sensitive design approach that aims to protect the communities against floods through the combination of grey infrastructure and nature-based solutions, to improve public health through the provision of sanitation services, to improve water and environmental quality, to diversify water sources through rainwater and wastewater harvesting and reuse, and to provide and create productive landscape to improve the microeconomy of these communities and to supply these productive landscapes with alternative water supplies. This here is a chronological series of images showing the transformation of this community through our efforts to improve safe flood access and the incorporation of constructed wetlands for sewage water treatment. Improved sanitation meant the environment on which children play in this community are no longer contaminated by sewage, and the sewage is treated to a quality that enables it to be safely discharged to the receiving water or to reuse for horticultural purposes. This proof of concept from this demonstration has now led to the commencement of similar approaches to concurrently address the multiple stresses on slum communities using nature-based solutions. So in conclusion, we see that nature-based solutions can take many forms and involve many different disciplinary practices. In essence, it's a recognition of the role of nature to help us address the many challenges we face today. Challenges related to disaster risk reduction associated with climate change, environmental degradation, equitable access of essential services. Disaster comes in many forms, and our aim is to create resilient and livable communities. The word solution in the terminology of nature-based solution is simply about harnessing the ecosystem services to help with creating solutions to these challenges. Interdisciplinary collaboration across planning, ecological sciences, engineering sciences, urban design and architecture, social sciences, and environmental economics all need to come together to enable nature-based solutions to be an integral part of the efforts in disaster risk reduction. As a summary to the presentation that we heard today, we have heard quite a wide spectrum of different activities and pathways that we need to adopt in implementing nature-based solutions. We heard from our first speaker the importance of partnership and the planning and governance in looking at a national approach to nature-based solutions. The National Adaptation Plan that encompasses issues of water management, agricultural practices, tourism, public health, natural resource management, human settlements and security all need to come together at a national framework to harness the ecosystem services that we need to protect us. One of the key points I made previously is that we shouldn't think of nature-based solutions as the solution to solve all of our problems, because they can't. What is important is that we need to think about how we can combine nature-based solutions with the traditional gray infrastructure to develop solutions that are fit for purpose for what we need. And we can see that in the presentation on the smart city construction, looking at how we would embed ecosystem services into city design, into planning. And we saw the range of scales as shown by Dr. Liu in terms of its implementation, from an allotment scale of rain gardens to large scales in terms of big ponds, big lakes in cities. The role of communities and stakeholder engagement is also crucial, as we heard from our third speaker. The practice of protection and restoring of sea reef community is one of those nature conservation and restoration activities that require significant whole of government effort to implement and re-establish the ecosystem services that we may have lost. The notion of looking at stakeholder consultation, particularly community consultation, and harnessing traditional knowledge is so vital in the way that we look at operationalizing many of the strategies that we have for nature-based solutions. And the example that we see in Fiji is a really important example on how we would need to come down to a community level when we actually start to think about implementing some of these nature-based solutions. Thank you for the opportunity to present today, and I would like to now pass back on to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. It was a great summarization of what we have heard today. We have seen some really awesome presentations and examples of nature-based solutions in practice. It's time for question and answers session, but we as a panel posed a question to Dr. Liu on the Spawn City, and we wanted to ask a question, which is, what are the challenges and obstacles your country has faced during the implementation of nature-based solutions initiatives and the Spawn City program in China? So back to Dr. Liu to answer that question.
That's a good question. Thank you for asking. We do have faced a lot of problems during Spawn City construction. In general, there are 4 major issues. Firstly, some people have wrong understanding of Spawn City. Some consider Spawn City as a solution for all city problems and all cities. Some think we should lock everything down to rebuild the city. This can result in serious resources waste and may remove the historic marks of a city. Secondly, some cities only focus on the building of image sponge projects, making it look sponge. However, the major goals like stormwater management, ecosystem restoration were ignored. In fact, a system review is very important. Certainly, some of the construction quality of Spawn City were not very good. Also, the maintenance sponge projects did not get enough attention. Lastly, some cities have blindly copied experience from others. I believe a good sponge city design should fully consider local conditions. Special plans should be made to guide local sponge projects. Hope this answers your question. Thank you. 谢谢.
Thank you, Dr. Lu. We got a couple of questions here on our app, so I'll just read them out and pass them on to our panel. The first question is from Matthew Chesnels. Question is, implementation depends on valuing natural landscapes over potential residential or commercial development, or returning land to nature. How can we achieve this without relying on policy approaches? I'll pass that question to Mr. Isbista and maybe Ms. Panmini. So we can start with you, Mr. Isbista, if you want to answer that question.
Thanks. I mean, I think one of the challenges, obviously, we know is we've got greater urbanisation, greater development. It does have impact on our environment, our landscape, and can have detrimental impacts on nature. And so the challenge, I think, is identifying, one, what are those impacts? Are they impacts that we can be accepting in terms of the broader holistic challenges we face around development, but also protecting our environment? And secondly, how can, in terms of planning, ensuring that we are using both customary practices and new technologies to try and reduce and possibly creatively find solutions that can not only protect but potentially utilise and support nature-based solutions in a more direct way. So I think that's where the point around partnerships and the role of government on policy, regulation, around the sort of role of local communities and consultation, and then the role of private sector investment has to come together in a mutually sort of accountable way.
Great, thank you. Ms. Panmini, would you like to add to that?
Thank you very much. And I have to say that this is the direct experience for Thailand for these policy approaches, because as you can see that, like within Bangkok, with the example that I have made, it's just like that we want a sponge, a giant sponge, to absorb all this water and keep Bangkok like no more flooded, or you have to like bypass the water as much as you can at a certain time to the sea. So that means we are saving the cities, right, within the business area. So it seems that we have protected the center of the cities, and then we have some areas that can be like the receiving of the waters. So this is one of the policy that you have to think about, the areas that appropriate for this ecosystem services, to keep the service for the cities. So first is the policy. The second thing is which area, and that area belongs to whom. If it's the government organizations, that's not going to be that hard because you can make the approaches to the organizations. But if that land belongs to the private sector, this is where the stakeholder engagement is the most important things. And they have to think about the investment. So we were thinking about blending finance, just not from the public sectors, but also within the private sectors that have all the engagement with this. So I have to say that the most important thing is the first thing is how you make the feasibility studies. Secondly, the stakeholder engagement and understanding, and also with the public. Thank you.
Great, thank you for your answers. Oh, we got a question here on the floor. A brave soul has come forward.
Brave indeed. Kia ora, my name's Suzanne Paisley. I work for NEMA New Zealand. My question is around how have these notions of nature-based solutions been accepted by your more traditional engineering types, particularly in coming up with solutions? There was a couple of comments around coming out with an integrated approach, but if people have gotten very used to doing things in a certain way, using hard engineering to fix problems, have there been any challenges that you've experienced by trying to reintroduce these more traditional ecosystem-based approaches? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone wants to have a go at it? Would you like to start, Alfred?
Yes, I can. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we face in terms of, going back to nature and reviving some of the best practices that indigenous communities have is that the fact that the current way of doing business is more towards unsustainable practices and trying to change the mindset, starting from the school system where a lot of the curriculum is more towards unsustainable a form of education, changing that curriculum to more towards sustainable education and education for sustainable development is something that needs to change. And we need to take into consideration that the cumulative impacts of unsustainable development that goes beyond the area in which development is located to territories, neighboring communities, or even those downstream. And this is something that we will have to take, and I think a lot of the sciences have shown from IPCC and also from the IP-based reports that we need a new business model which actually looks at transforming the way that we do business and taking into consideration that we can be building resilient infrastructures or resilient roads, but if we are actually in the process of building this resilient infrastructure, destroying the green infrastructure at the same time, then the implications in the long term is actually not going to be good for us, but also for the people at the grassroots level. So this is something, we did face a lot of challenges, but it's about, talking with the communities, talking with other stakeholders that will, and looking at how we can meet at a middle ground to be able to, reduce the impacts, but at the same time get multiple benefits coming out of it.
Thanks. I just want to carry on with that question to Ms. Panmini in terms of your policy development and translating into practice, how you have overcome those challenges in terms of practitioners and designers of those projects.
Actually, right now within Thailand, we also have the landscape people working with the engineering people. As if I can go to my PowerPoint, there's like the last page. That is a very good design of the recreation area, which is combined with the landscape people, with the engineering people. And they have this kind of like the channels, like because in Bangkok, we also have this urban heat islands. So when we design this within nature-based solutions, they have the open channel for the wind. So you can stay there, like very nice and cool environment. So this is one of the important things. And I think if we have this kind of examples, people do not go to the department store anymore, but because they want to connect it to nature. As the BC ratios already stated that the value of the properties is increasing through 20 years. That means people in the cities, especially large cities, they want to be connected with nature. So I think there's a shift, a model shift with this already. So we have to be prepared. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Panmini. We got time for just one last question, which I'll ask Mr. Espister to look at this question. The role of local government, to your central government, but role of local government seems important for implementing nature-based solutions. What are some ways to support and encourage local government to champion nature-based solutions?
I think there's a connection between that question and the one before and what Alfred's response was in relation to infrastructure. We've had a traditional view of infrastructure, which is very much sort of, a hard element. It's roads, it's buildings, it's hardware, one might say, and yes, they are all important as part of cities and the development and that of communities. But I think what we're increasingly realising is how critical actually, and that nature-based solutions, whether it's management of our mangroves, coastlines, our forests, our ecosystems, is actually a natural infrastructure, and it's a form of where we can really understand how things like if we're dealing with the challenges around sea level rise and the encroachment on communities, that actually the protection of our mangroves, our coastlines and blue carbon can be a key factor, not the only factor, but a key factor in terms of preventing and some of the worst impacts, or at least not accelerating them. And so I think for local governments, I think working with communities to understand what's the holistic approach that one wants to take to try and look at the needs of community, the benefits that, you know, in the past that we've had a strong focus around development, as I said, from the hard infrastructure, but increasingly now realising that that really has to be informed and coupled with an acknowledgement and appreciation of the natural assets that we have and how they've got to be considered in any planning and design of a local community investments and planning going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. We are almost at the end of our session. I just wanted to really, in wrapping up, say that it's a shift in mindset. We have already seen that it is practical, it is possible. We got great examples to show that it has happened at large scale, national scale, city scale, and as well as a community scale. But it's the shift in mindset that we need, that it is a part of an integrated process of building the hard and soft infrastructure together, and we need to make that change and challenge ourselves and the policymakers and our designers to really think broader than just hard infrastructure. So hope you found the session informative and provide the impetus to integrate nature-based solutions in our policy framework, infrastructure planning and design, and linking policy, practice, and community as a whole. I would like to thank our panel. Please give a round of applause to our panel and speak. And just I'll leave you with the last question. It's a change of mindset. So how spongy can we be? Thank you. Kapai.